order the meeting of the Air Pollution Control Board, and it is Tuesday, June 10th, and apologize again for the delay. We should have never started on a discussion, but we did, so there. So, let's start with our Pledge of Allegiance for this Air Pollution Control Board. Hand over heart, ready to begin. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Thank you. Next up, we have our minutes of our meeting of May 13th.
Move to approve.
There's a motion and a second. Any objections to that? Seeing, hearing none. Minutes are approved. Next up, we have our public and consent agenda comments. Any cards from the public? No cards from the public wishing to speak to our board. Next up, we have item 4, board comments. Are there matters, comments from the board? Items you wish to bring to our attention? Mr. Brennan. Didn't you say yes? You got any comments?
No, I'm sorry.
Oh, that was a no, he doesn't. So no comments. There will not be a closed session of this board, and our regular agenda item 6, is a public hearing regarding our fiscal year Air Pollution Control District budget. Good morning, Mr. Villegas.
Good morning, Chair Long, members of the board. I'm Mike Villegas, Air Pollution Control Officer. I'll be discussing the operating budget today, as on the special revenue budget portion, expenditures and revenue are always matched because it's our pass-through grants and has no effect on the district's fund balance. Quick overview. Revenues are down by approximately $1.65 million, but this is largely due to the movement of the revenue from the pass-through grants from our operating budget into the special revenue fund. Expenditures are down by approximately $373,000 from the current fiscal year, and we have one increment 2 request, which I'll discuss in detail. On the expenditure side, as I said, expenditures are down by about $373,000. The major decrease was on services and supplies, where we saw a decrease of $387,000, and this is mainly due to a decrease in our liability insurance of $229,000. In other words, the costs from the Halico lawsuit have finally been paid off. And we also have a one-time decrease in our cost allocation plan, which is actually how we pay for services such as human resources, etc. here at the county. So that's decreased one time, though. This will be just for this upcoming fiscal year of $100,000. Salary and employee benefits have increased $25,000. The increase could have been much more significant. However, we paid off the debt service on the pension obligation bond, so there's a significant decrease there. And the other thing is that we now have, in the special revenue fund, administration money to handle those pass-through grants. Our fixed assets are down by $11,000, and that's due to reduced spending on capital assets. We scrutinized all our expenditures, and we continue to do so to look for additional savings. Just recently, we switched to a new supplier for nitrogen for our lab that's going to save us about $5,000 a year. On the revenue side, as I said before, I saw a decrease of $1.65 million, and it's largely made up of transferring the pass-through grants over to the special revenue fund, and that accounts for actually $1.63 million of that decrease. Also, our federal grant dropped by approximately $88,000, but this is due to the completion of the equipment purchases for our new PM 2.5 data acquisition system for our monitoring stations. On the increment 2, once again, we're proposing to support VCTC's Dialout program at a level of $25,000. The program provides transit information to the public via toll-free number and via their internet website. I believe this is a valuable program as we're seeing an increase in transit ridership, and I think this information is quite valuable to new riders. Getting people into public transportation reduces both criteria pollutant emissions and greenhouse gas emissions. Also, if we did not pass these funds, these DMV funds, through to VCTC, we would actually have to pass them to another program, so there's no net effect on the district's operating budget. Here's a graphic of our expenditures, and as you can see, salaries and employee benefits are over 80% of our expenditures. And what it shows here is we've been very effective at reducing costs on the services and supply side. This slide shows the proposed revenue sources, and the big three are the DMV fees at $2.8 million, our permit fees at $2.4 million, and the federal grant at $1.3 million. For the upcoming fiscal year, we're looking at a net cost of $324,000, and this excludes the $300,000 for contingencies. And for the first time in many years with the new special revenue fund, we have no carryover revenue from the pass-through grants, which is clouding the picture. And I'm going to discuss this deficit in the next slide. Where it looks significant, once again, we've budgeted $104,000 for fines and penalties, where when you look at the actual revenue over the past 5 years, it's averaged $325,000. And we just recently had a settlement this month, which is actually bringing the current fiscal year fine and revenue up to $425,000. So conservatively, you could expect another $220,000 in revenue in the upcoming fiscal year. Also, the proposed budget does not include any revenue from our implementation of the statewide portable equipment registration program. We estimate that the minimum we'd receive would be between $20,000 to $30,000 in the upcoming fiscal year. We did not include this revenue because both the timing and the amount on the funding is uncertain. Therefore, our actual deficit is most likely going to be under $90,000. And to put it in perspective, we have an upper fund balance target of $4 million at this time, and our fund balance is at a level of $6 million. So we're going to be able to weather this upcoming fiscal year without any staff reductions. The big picture, DMV fees are covering all the costs related to motor vehicle programs, including efforts from our planning division, our inventory, and our monitoring. It includes our carpool program, Rule 211, and also a lot of our public outreach. We now have additional administrative funds to cover the implementation of the Carl Moyer, the school bus, and the agricultural assistance programs. However, fees and grants are not covering the cost of programs not related to motor vehicles or incentive programs. In other words, our core programs are still struggling based on permit revenue and the federal grant. Your board approved a permit fee increase in April, and the regulated community seems to understand that the district implements a mandated air quality program. And without significant increases in our federal grant or our state subvention, they're responsible for the costs. However, you heard that they are quite pleased with our level of service and permitting and the fairness of the district. And you heard this testimony during our fee hearing in April. The federal grant is predicted to be stable, and we're getting help in Congress on staving off any proposed cuts. We continue to lobby to both secure and increase our federal grant, and Congress has been quite supportive. There's no change in the state subvention, which is actually quite positive when you consider the state budget crisis. We're working to utilize all the administrative funds we're receiving for our incentive programs to the maximum extent feasible. And the effect that these new funds have had is actually 1.5 full-time equivalent positions have been moved out of our operating budget and are now funded through the special revenue fund. And these are engineering positions, so they're not lower-level positions. So in essence, there's almost like we've had a reduction of staff in the operating budget, so it's been quite beneficial to receive these new administrative funds. In the future, we're looking at more modest fee increases, probably in the 6 to 10% range, and they're going to be necessary to offset any salary increases that occur via labor agreements. Retirement contributions are stabilizing, and once again, with the pension obligation bonds being paid off, things look a little better for the future. here's a projection of the fund balance. The blue line shows we can maintain our fund balance for the next few years with a couple of 8% fee increases. Of course, you can't really use these projections to look past 1 or 2 years. You can see, without an increase in state subvention or a federal grant, fee increases alone are not going to allow us to have a balanced budget. Oh, man, that looks good on the computer and terrible up here. And it looks better on that one. But the blue line includes, yeah. The dark line on top includes fee increases. And the gray line includes, there's no fee increases in that one. And then the two lines running across are the upper and lower targets for the fund balance. And what you can really see there is even with fee increases, without an increase in the federal grant or state subvention, we're not going to be able to balance our budget. However, Congress has been proposing significant increases to our federal grant, and this could occur under a new administration. The Air Resources Board has let us know they would like to increase state subvention after the state budget crisis passes, but that could be a few years out. Also, the district may end up obtaining a significant amount of funding depending on our role in implementing AB 32, the California Global Warming Solutions Act, because right now there is a lot of talk that we would be the enforcement staff for that act, and there's a good chance we'd actually be the permitting agencies. So there's a chance that in addition to the fees we're charging now, we could be charging carbon dioxide fees in the future, but we'll have to see how that plays out. That's all I have, and I'll do my best to answer questions.
Other questions? Yes, Mr. Holden.
That the retirement fund was stabilizing, but on attachment 1, page 1, it looks like the contribution in the 06-07 was $770,000, 07-08 was $806, so about $40,000 increase, and this year it looks like 903, another $40,000 increase. Is that considered to be stabilizing?
That is, considering what we were seeing a few years back. We saw doubling. And I have to, admit, with the current performance of the stock market, I'm concerned.
Is this consistent with the county?
Oh, yeah, it is the county cost. We use the county retirement system.
And Mayor Holden, we were paying our pension obligation bonds, and those were kicking the rates up also. Those pension obligation bonds have been paid off, so we don't have that hit. Now we just have the normal, what's going to happen in the stock market, et cetera. So we were suffering, like Mike said, 70, 80% increases for a couple of years.
Okay.
And so for him, he thinks an 8% increase is stable. Right. Stable in terms of, at least we're not coming in with 60, 70%.
Thank you.
Mike, let me ask you a question if I could. You got a big reduction in your liability insurance here.
Yes.
Workers' comp is down too.
Yes.
So you got those insurance costs down. We still got this deficit. What happens when this insurance market turns on us and we still see this, because we know the insurance market has a tendency to be a soft market, which we're in, and that we're going to see some of those costs. We can't sustain. We're $90,000 now, and if we continue this trend, we've got to find some way to try to get close to balance in this budget, don't you think?
That's right. It's going to either have to be assistance from the state, the feds, climate change work, or we're going to have to reduce it's going to be program cuts.
If you cut your program, what would you be cutting? What would the effect be?
There's certainly, I'm not going to cut in enforcement. I'm certainly not going to cut in permitting. They're down to, I think, bare bones. We're going to have to look at other.
And does permitting pay for the people that do permitting?
Yes, it does.
Yes, that
it
pays
covers
for itself.
them.
And does enforcement pay for itself?
Not quite.
Not quite, but it's.
It does help, but it can't quite pay for itself.
You didn't listen. We also have to look at our fees, right?
That's right. We have to look at our fees,
Right.
and we might have to look at, like I said, some program reductions. But right now, I got to tell you, the district is pretty lean.
I know you've done a good job making it lean as it could be.
And we're still getting it work done, and we're being very, I think, proactive when we respond to complainants, etc. In the future, if we have to make program cuts, I think there's going to be effects that the public's going to notice. And we're going to do everything to, not cut permitting, because those 1,400 facilities, those are our main clients, and we need to take care of them, and that's our core business, and same with enforcement and our planning. But we're going to have to get leaner in other areas. Some of the assistance we provide in reviewing environmental impact reports and such like that, I mean, when you look at it, if it's not mandated, it might be something we have to look at in the future.
Right.
If we don't get assistance.
Because even if you doubled your fees, instead of 8%, you have up there to 16%, you're still not getting close to covering
No,
that.
and under statute, the maximum increase is 15%.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So we, even going up to those numbers, you're still not going to reach your deficit. You can't make it up in fees.
That's right.
Yeah. Go ahead.
I think that what you propose is a good idea because 90,000 this year in the hole, as you say, but it gives us 1 year to see if the state or feds are going to come through with something.
Exactly.
And next year, that's when we're going to have to make some decisions.
That's
Yeah,
exactly
you've
right.
got a great fund balance, and you've done a good job with that, so you can always, that's what you're here for, to make some of these adjustments, but I think that's a good point, see if it's a trend that's going to keep going.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mike, the number's up there for the VCTC Dialout
Yes.
program, and believe me, for my fellow VCTC or folks that represent us, I just wanted to just bring this up. I know I don't want to kick them when they're down. Certainly, the website's been down for almost a month, and they're working on that, so I understand that's a problem. That number I've seen up there from, I think, 3,000 to 4,000 calls a month, is that right?
Yeah, I receive an annual report from
That seems to be that number. The last 5 years, it's been exactly that. It seems.
Yeah.
I mean, would be a better way of doing that, of tracking that. The reason I bring that up is having not able to find out where the Coast Express was scheduled. I called 3 times to the number and got an answering machine, and so I'm only saying it's not kicking them when they're down. There's a lot going on in the organization. I'm just wondering. I don't mind giving the 25,000, but maybe to VCTC, because I know that they do great stuff. I'm just concerned about that program. Are we really tracking it appropriately? Could that money go to different technology that might help a little differently? Maybe that 25,000 could have helped on the website. I don't know. I don't sit there and get to look at it. I just wanted to bring that up and say, is there a better way of being able to track that, or a little cleaner way of, because that number has never changed, and every time it's come up to us, that number's always been the same. And I just find that one hard to believe, because the web use has gotten way, way up, and I would think the phone's gone down. So, is there anybody we don't have staff from BCTC?
No, we don't. But I'll certainly be happy to contact them, because I receive a letter each year outlining what they've been doing,
And I have no problem with the 25,000.
Yeah.
I would just like to maybe know it's going to something else that might work.
I'll pass along certainly that we've heard concerns that the website's been down, and that, they got an answering machine instead of a live body,
And the Coast Express schedules, the Vista buses aren't posted. I mean, it wasn't on Gold Coast Transit because they technically don't have it, and the link was down, so I couldn't find it anywhere, except obviously I went to the bus stop and there it was. But I mean, that was a little difficult because I was trying to get somebody else onto the bus to go to Santa Barbara. So it was just from a personal use, and I just want to say that I think it's the great programs in terms of getting people hooked up. I think the Go Ventura, put it on the web, and plans your whole trip for you, planes, trains, bicycles, and ferries. It can get you from here to Timbuktu, but I just think getting around the Vista bus, somehow the Dialout program might have outlived itself, and maybe it's time to look at something else.
Okay.
Thank you.
That's a great comment, because we have to look at all the programs we fund and just not keep funding them, because the problem what we do is we've always done this, we always do it. And there's such a scarcity of dollars, we have to see what programs really work, and so that's a good comment.
I also think that VCTC, under Ginger, were able to get grants from all over the place. I wasn't sure where she was getting these grants, but she was able to raise more money than I think he can with just our quality money here. There's transportation money coming from different sources.
Madam Chair, Michael, do you know approximately how much square feet you have in your facility, in your offices?
21,000 square feet.
21,000?
That's total. After we did our reduction in force, we let some of that space go, and the UC Cooperative Farm Advisors, kind of a county UC agency, they brought staff in, and that reduced our rent.
Is it 21,000 square feet after the reduction of space? Or?
That was before the reduction. Yeah, we're running out just over 1,000 now. And it's
You're running over what now?
1,000 to the farm advisor, about 1,000 square feet.
That's what you're leasing now? So the line item shows 180,000 a year in leases.
Yes.
So that's for How much square feet?
And our labs.
The reason I ask, and looking down the road, and I don't, almost $200,000 is $200,000. At some point, we may be forced to look at accommodating the offices in a city or county facility that it's not a market rate lease. That you're faced with reductions of staff and
Yeah, good point, because there's always a lot of extra space that's open in different places. And
Yeah, we are in a county building right now.
What's that?
We are in a county building right now.
so that's the rate that gets paid to the county. Then.
Yes.
So.
Although we have, and we have.
So we got something else. I'll release you for about 120,000. Well, then my strategy doesn't work very well, because I thought if this was a market lease, we could house it into a public facility and eliminate a couple $100,000 a year. But
Mr. Sharkey.
Thank you, yeah, and Member Brennan reminded me, and as if I needed it. We've had this discussion at VRSD as well, who's also in a rented building. I mean, there may be a possibility for some of these agencies, this one, VCTC, VRSD, that are renting place now. Maybe there's a purchase option available, or there may be a way to combine our resources into one building, and we could also save some money. And I don't know if Mr. Lawler's had contact with you on that, but it always seemed like a good idea to me. And VRSD's got a pretty good lease rate right now, so maybe the motivation isn't there. But as we look at the market right now, this might be a good time to pursue that. I think Mr. Holden's points are well taken, and if we're cutting back on the needs that this agency requires, then there might be some business opportunities out there as well. That all these public agencies right now that are kind of scattered and on their own, we get together and we might be able to save a few bucks, and maybe have some rentable property as well that could pay for itself.
Yeah, absolutely. We've Mark Lawler and I have been discussing this possibility.
Okay. Other questions? Again, this is the first of two public hearings on the proposed fiscal year 08-09 budget. Any other questions on it? Okay, so we'll move forward to what would be the second public hearing, which will be held sometime this month.
No motion.
June
No
20th.
motion, no. June.
June 24th.
I knew that. June 24th.
Did you have any cards?
Okay.
Did you have any public cards?
No, sir. No public cards. So the public hearing was opened, is now closed for this first hearing. Thank you. Thank you. Hearing no other conversation on this. Item number 7, public hearing. Again, public hearing regarding proposed new Rule 55 on fugitive dust. Mr. Villegas.
On May 13th, your board conducted a hearing on proposed new Rule 55 fugitive dust. At that hearing, staff proposed a change to specify that the maintenance of spreading grounds in preparation for groundwater recharge operations would be exempt from the rule, and this because emissions from this operation would have a very difficult time complying with the limits in the rule. Since that rule change was substantive in nature, the hearing was continued until today. Upon the advice of County Council, District staff has added clarifying language to the proposed exemption. The new language is denoted by double underline in Attachment 1. This new language is a clarification only and is not substantive in nature. This rule is a major step forward to reducing emissions of particulate matter and is expected to reduce particulate matter emissions by 6 tons per day. Further, these emission reductions are cost-effective based on the cost-effectiveness guidelines approved by your board. And Supervisor Bennett, you had asked about a health effects study related to particulate matter emissions. And I know when people, you think about fugitive dust, you're thinking about wind-blown dust, but when we're also talking about track out here from construction sites, sand and gravel, what happens then is you're taking a fairly large particulate, piece of particulate, and you're placing it on the road. What happens after vehicles pass by, they pulverize it into a much smaller particulate, which can be inhalable and can be quite damaging to health. And the study that I believe you were referring to was there's been studies in the past showing that particulate matters linked to increased hospital admissions, and we've discussed that before, and premature death. And the mechanism that was understood there is that particulate matter leads to an inflammation response in the body. So someone with heart disease who's already got narrowed blood vessels, obviously that inflammation response is something they don't want occurring in them because it increases the risk of that heart attack coming. And the new study showed that in addition to the inflammation response, it actually affects what they call blood coagulability. In other words, the body responds by thickening the blood, which is the exact opposite of what a heart patient wants, who's generally on blood thinners. So there's multiple mechanisms here, and this pollutant has significant adverse health effects. And there was just a recent study that went to the Air Resources Board, and they're doing it and showing that some people genetically are predisposed where these effects are much more marked than other people in the general population, and they're doing additional research on that. So I believe this rule is going to have a significant public health benefit. We first proposed a categorical exemption from CEQA for this rule action. However, this was questioned by industry representatives based on the emissions from diesel engines used to power street sweepers and watering trucks. Staff prepared an environmental impact report, and based on that, our conclusion is that reductions in particulate matter, which are quite large, achieved by watering trucks and street sweepers, outweighs the impacts of the collateral emissions from these vehicles. However, because these collateral emissions can result in significant impacts, a statement of overriding consideration is required for the proposed rule action. Our district's advisory committee unanimously recommended adoption of this rule. Therefore, it is our recommendation that you approve the recommended actions. And I'll be happy to answer questions.
Questions?
Is this just related to groundwater recharge?
Yes, it is.
And I'm not sure why they should be called out special from other potentially beneficial public uses.
What happens is we also realized, and this was kind of in the rule, that agricultural on-field operations such as disking, by nature, create so much dust, they're not going to be able to comply with the opacity and visible emission requirements of the rule, so they were exempted. What we didn't realize is that when these groundwater basins, they can be 150, 200 acres. And what happens is after the groundwater percolates into the soil, they're left with an algae mat. And what they do is they go to break it up, and in essence, they're disking up the soil or scraping or ripping, whatever you want to call it, and they're running into the exact same issue that the agriculture community ran into. So based on that logic, we expanded that. And it was just something that didn't come up during the workshop or the advisory committee process.
Just a quick question, Mike. I was out on Arnold Road a couple weeks ago and driving towards Ormond Beach, just south of Wainimi, and they were grading a field, getting ready to prepare it. It was amazing the amount of dust that was coming out that field. Do you have any idea of the percentages of particulate matter? I mean, we're talking about very focused legislation and oversight on a lot of operations, but do we have any idea, percentage-wise, how much is really just related to the overall agricultural industry? And I mean, it's got to be a significant number compared to the whole number we're looking at. I mean,
I think we did in the staff report, and looking at, we were still achieving quite a bit.
Were we?
And one thing I realized that,
I guess the question is, and I obviously agriculture is not the enemy, but it's interesting they're completely what's the word I'm looking for? Exempt from any of the. I mean, like Supervisor Parks just mentioned, there could be some pre-watering and things that were done, and even in grading operations. But I guess at this point, we really don't have a lot of choice when it comes to ag.
And by nature, agricultural does try to keep the loss of topsoil down, because that's their future. I mean, and what we saw, there was one other district, the San Joaquin, that actually worked with agriculture on this, and they came up and they actually have the different farmers submit what they call dust mitigation plans, which are, in essence, soil management practices. But what we found is, what the farmers complained was, we're doing these because we don't want to lose our topsoil, so I'm filling out a form and I'm sending it to you and you're reviewing it. I'm not changing any of my practices. And so it seems the rest of the districts in California are just kind of taking
I think from a perception standpoint, though, if you have an exemption to agriculture versus
exactly.
agriculture that is currently following guidelines for
soil conservation.
Right. This comment.
Question. How many of you are farmers or been in the farming industry? Anyone here?
How many what?
Farmers, been in the farming industry at all. Do you know that you disc the soil when you know wind's coming, so that the damper soil's on top, and the dry soil's on top blowing. So when you see them discing the soil during windy period, or prior to that, if you know it's coming, is to prepare that for that circumstance.
I'm not a farmer, Councilman, but I tell you, I live adjacent to farm fields, and I know the amount of dust that comes off, regardless of the practices. I think that there's just no way around it. I mean, I think
Sometimes we have to live with farming.
Exactly.
There.
Yeah, exactly.
We made that decision.
Right, and I'm not, that's what I'm saying, farming's not the enemy. I'm just saying that if we have language that says they're exempt from these measures versus they are currently trying to practice the measures that in the best interest matter. That's just
But if they put into effect best management practices,
That's what they should
then that will help with the public relations that they have to meet too.
Exactly. And the other thing that we keep in mind is the dust from agriculture. A lot of things from agriculture are exempt, such as odors, but dust from the field is actually not exempt from our nuisance regulations. So if we run into a situation where someone is really just covering some adjacent homes with dust and we get complaints, we can actually take action.
The cities can do that also.
Yes.
Because we've done that with in a couple places where it happened at one time. So.
It's a pleasure of the board. This is a public hearing regarding the proposed new rule, has 5 recommended actions.
Second.
So motion and a second to adopt the recommended action. There were no cards submitted from the public to comment on this, so the public hearing is closed. And with the motion and a second, any objection to the motion? Hearing seeing none, recommended actions go forward. Adopted. Thank you. And that completes our agenda for today. We do have a standing committee that will follow this meeting, and we will see you all in
2 weeks.
July. Wait a minute.
June 24th.
June 24th, that's right. For the